hell's in there? It's weird and pissed off, whatever it is.
Is imagination simply contained in the mind? Or does it tap into an unseen world with messages waiting to be told? There is a place where legends cross over into our world, where strange visions and whispers beckon, and superstition takes hold. Step into the Black Cat's shadow.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Black Cat Shadow. I'm your host Andy, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri, and this is episode 11. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about monsters. We will be continuing our series, our Horror 101 series, where we are talking about each subgenre within horror and kind of giving you a taste of what each one is like. If you're, and this series is pretty much for anyone that's new to horror or curious about horror movies. It's just kind of like a little introduction to each subgenre within horror. This week we are talking about the monster subgenre and all the different types of monsters within that. Joining me on the podcast is my co-host Dakota. How's it going, Dakota?
It's going. I'm excited to talk about some monsters. I mean, this is a good topic for me just because I grew up watching monster movies. Yeah,
I did too. I remember loving the Godzilla movies, and I, had all the toys and everything. And I think the first horror movie I saw was a monster movie. It was the movie Alien. I was in love with monsters from a very young age. Did you watch a lot of monster movies when you were a kid?
Yeah, I grew up watching like the cheesy Godzilla movies. Those were my favorite movies growing up just because I liked how I just kind of find it funny with the Japanese how they would do, like, you'd see their mouths moving and then like the words would come in like a second after. It was just kind of cheesy and funny to me. So it kind of made me laugh, and then I started getting into more like the actual like monsters like Swamp Thing and It Came from the Depths.
Yeah, It Came from the Depths. I'm trying to place that one. I don't know if there was one from like the 80s called Up from the Depths.
Well, It Came from the Depths was like a 50s or 60s horror movie.
Okay.
So it was one of those classic monster movies.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about Swamp Thing for a long time, but that's a good movie too. It's a good classic 80s movie. So we'll go ahead and jump into our 5-minute frenzy. And on this 5-minute frenzy, Dakota had me watch Open Water from 2003. Yeah, I kind of was like looking at this at first like, well, this doesn't sound like a horror movie, but yeah, I guess when you think about it, it really is. There's a lot of, just the situation is really scary. Being left in the ocean, with just on your own, you're just basically floating in the ocean. You have no idea what's around you, what's in the water with you, and you don't have any food or water. You're surrounded by water, but you can't drink it. So that would be a very horrifying experience. And, so in these 5-minute frenzies, we just basically go through and explain from our point of view what we feel like happened in the movie, and get a different take on it from each one of us, since it's a psychological horror movie. Each one of us could have a different point of view. So in this one was a pretty simple story. It's basically about a couple that go on vacation, and they go scuba diving, and through just an honest mistake, they get left behind. So the tour boat that they're riding leaves them in the ocean, and unfortunately nobody notices for a couple of days. So they're floating in the ocean. And there's points where you think that they might have a chance to be rescued because there's some other boats that are kind of near them, but they would have to swim to them, and the husband is kind of saying, the husband was saying, it's not going to do any good to swim to those other boats because the current's just going to take us where it wants. And so they ended up just kind of staying where they were at and just kind of being at the mercy of the ocean. And as it goes along, they kind of run into some jellyfish that they get stung by, and then they kind of drift, and they end up drifting to an area where there's these sharks, and they get stalked by these sharks, and it is a pretty scary situation. I definitely would not want to find myself in this situation. But you kind of see their progression mentally. They, at first they're pretty positive, like, okay, somebody's bound to know we're missing, and then as the day goes on, they kind of start turning on each other, blaming each other for their situation, and like I said, nature is working against them because at first they get stung by these jellyfish, and then one of them gets bit by a shark, and so that kind of brings more sharks along because of the blood in the water, and they just have no idea where they're at. They can't see land anywhere, and they can't swim anywhere. They're just floating, and also they're getting cold and also hungry and thirsty. So it's a very scary situation. And the ending was very bleak. Of course, for whatever reason, the husband is the first one that dies. He was the one that got bit by a shark. So either he died from blood loss or just exposure. I'm not sure, but and then the wife just kind of like takes off his scuba gear and lets him kind of float away. And then as he's floating away, it's a very effective scene. It's very I don't know what the word is, but it's very effective where you just see the shark start to eat him, and you're just like, oh crap. And then she just basically like drowns herself, and I thought that was really, I don't know if I could actually do that. Like, even if I knew that the situation was really that there was no hope, I don't know if I could actually drown myself. So anyways, very bleak ending. Dakota, what's your take on that?
Well, for this movie to actually have been effective, it had to push on those boundaries that we've talked about before in horror. The boundary is the struggle to survive or give up, and that's the main horror element is the struggle between the two characters, whether they're going to strive for that or not. So it's more or less instead of a physical struggle like we see in other types of horror movies, it's more of a mental struggle where they have to either, like we talked about 1408 before. It was a mental struggle for this character, whether he wanted to continue on or give up. Like we talked about earlier, before we even got on the podcast here, we talked about like the fear of the unknown, like what's under the water. I mean, that's a big fear for a lot of people, specifically me and you. I know we mentioned it before. So I think what this movie really, really did was take our vulnerabilities and turn them against us. Basically made us feel more vulnerable than we really are. And if a lot of people actually went and seen this in theaters, and I had a couple of friends of mine that were, maybe in 2003, that would have been, or 2004, or whatever it was. I mean, we were still pretty young. I mean, I had friends who went to go see this in theater with their parents, and they were terrified for the rest of their lives. I have a friend that I used to work with who said when he saw that movie, he was terrified of sharks, and he still can't go to the ocean.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, if I go to the ocean, I just sit on the beach. I I don't even get in the water at all. I've seen Jaws too many times, and this movie, it's a real, definitely, it feeds on that real fear of being eaten by sharks.
Yeah, this movie was fairly successful. I mean, the budget for it was only $500,000, which I can understand being very very low cinematography for the movie. But the box office on it, $54 million.
Wow,
almost $55 million. That's a huge margin.
Oh yeah, and I could definitely see the low budget aspect of it, because I kind of, when you're watching it, you can see, it's kind of shot on video. It looks like it looks like it was shot on somebody's handheld video camera. So and I understand, it's like, okay, it was low budget, so there's some corners they had to cut, with like filming and yeah. So I guess I had to kind of give it some leeway in that area.
Yeah, and the people that actually, the guy who directed it, Chris Kentis, was the same one who directed Silent House with his wife. I think it was his wife, yeah.
Yeah.
Laura Lau. I mean, they both did the cinematography on it, so they both did the camera, they directed, I think they even, Laura Lau produced the movie. And I mean, this movie is just, it's a perfect example of psychological horror, but it's also a perfect example of, we talked about how B movies can be some of the most successful movies. And I mean, this is definitely a B movie, but it was considered a box office, it was a blockbuster.
Sure.
It's very rare that you have a B movie become a blockbuster. I mean, Sharknado, obviously, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, there's some things that for whatever reason they just gain a following. People just really attach to it and latch onto it, and they just love it. There has been quite a history of these low budget movies that make quite a bit of money at the box office. I mean, you look at Blair Witch Project. I don't even know what the budget was for that, but it had to be pocket change. And they walked away with several $1 million, or probably more than that. So yeah, that just goes to show you it doesn't take a lot of money to make a good movie, and a movie that people are going to want to go and see. You were talking with this movie. I don't think any of these other actors have ever been in anything else other than this movie and a couple other B movies. I mean, with Blair Witch Project, how many of those actors that were in that movie actually went on to do bigger and better things? Yeah, none of them except for the director.
M. Night Shyamalan.
I think it was,
that's who directed it.
I think it was Eduardo Sanchez. Let's see here. Yeah, it was the directors for Blair Witch for Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez.
Okay, so then they must have gone on and done something bigger and better. But I mean, some of those actors probably walked away with a pretty penny though after the cult success of the movie.
Oh yeah, you would think so. I mean, and yeah, I mean, as far as I know, they didn't go on to do anything else. But they may have done some other indie movies or something like that. But yeah, Open Water definitely plays on your psychological fears there. All right, so yeah, in this episode we're going to be talking about the monster genre of horror, and within that there is various types of monster movies that have been made, and so we're just going to kind of touch on there's some main types that we're going to kind of touch on and talk about some examples of each one, and hopefully, with this, you're gonna. I mean, I think everybody pretty much knows what a monster is, and so it's gonna be pretty self-explanatory. But we just want to give you an idea of maybe some history of some monster movies and some of the different types, and yeah. So anyway, so the first type of monster movie I wanted to talk about was the zombie movie, the zombie monster movies, and of course, right now they're pretty popular, mainly because of The Walking Dead. They've really brought in the mainstream crowd to the zombies. But I think in the movie world, they're kind of dying down some, because I haven't really seen a lot of zombie movies being made recently. I mean, I think there are one or two here and there. But within the zombie genre, there's this, you have a few different types of zombies. You've got, with the older movies, you have what what are referred to as like voodoo zombies, which are like, well, there's an old movie called White Zombie with Bela Lugosi. And in these older movies, the zombies were created with like a potion, and the effects could be reversed. They weren't really like a dead person at this point. And then you've got like the undead zombies, which are what was in like Night of the Living Dead, which was like dead corpses coming back to life. You know, it was irreversible. These people couldn't be cured. And you know, you had to basically destroy them by shooting them in the head or destroying their head. And these are the zombies that are like slow moving, it's kind of lurching, and they can live for years without food or water or even oxygen, but their bodies will still decay, but very slowly. And then you've got like the infected movies, and these are like movies like 28 Days Later, where it's actually like living people, but they've just been infected by some kind of virus, and these are usually like the fast like zombies or whatever. They usually run after people, but then there usually is no cure. It's pretty much irreversible, but they're easier to kill. And these zombies, they usually have to keep eating or else they will starve and die. But yeah, probably the best example of those is like 28 Days Later. I don't know, Dakota. What zombie movies do you like?
I mean, I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil movies. I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate on that just because it doesn't match the games. It doesn't match the games. Well, that's the point. They weren't supposed to match the games. They're supposed to kind of take a different spin on it. But I mean, with 28 Days Later, I love the idea. Those are that's the rage zombies. I mean, there was another movie that came out. It had Roma Mitra in it. It was a couple back in like 2005, 2006. It was just, those are like like there was another like infection like that too, but they weren't really zombies. But they got to the point where eventually these infected people starved off. They became rage zombies and then died. But with 28 Days Later, and then I think 28 weeks later, you saw an evolution because I don't know. It started with rabies, right?
Yeah. So there was 28 Days Later starts off with these activists. They break into like a laboratory where these like monkeys are being tested on, and yeah, some kind of like rabies or something like that. But yeah, so when the humans get infected, they just go crazy. Yeah, they get the rage virus, and with the virus, with the infected people, they are actually, it's like they're actually trying to spread the virus or whatever it is. Whereas with like the undead, they're just wanting to eat people. Not the spread of the undead zombies, just kind of a byproduct of what they do. Whereas the infected, that's like their main goal is to infect other people with it.
So then the concept of this like the Resident Evil zombies, it was a virus that was released from a laboratory, and it continued to go and go and go and infect more people, and eventually it evolved into a parasite. So that's kind of where we draw the line in the horror genre. It turns from a zombie movie into more of a sci-fi movie. So the zombie movies, like we talked about the two different types of zombies, the undead and the virus. I think really with the virus movies, it kind of strays from horror. It gets more into sci-fi. So I think that's kind of where we have to draw the line. So I'd stick with more like the undead zombies or more horror type zombies. Yeah,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so like with World War Z, with Brad Pitt, that's more of like the virus zombies. It's not as much horror because like the undead zombies, they're actually like eating people, and you usually have more gore along with that. And I was trying to think of like what I'm trying to think of like a zombie movie that I really like, and I think I'd have to go with actually a remake, the Dawn of the Dead remake from the early 2000s. I really like that one. That one's pretty good. I would say if you guys haven't seen it, check that out. Dakota, have you seen that one?
Yeah, actually, that was kind of an evolution for me, kind of growing from like the old school, like George Romero zombies, the slow lurching, walking zombies, and then you get to the remake of Dawn of the Dead. Those are more of the act. Don't they act more like the rage zombies though? They do run and stuff, right?
Yeah,
Or are they still
exactly.
more?
Exactly. They're like the fast zombies.
Okay, so that's still an evolution. They're still the undead, but they're still fast. So it kind of evolved with the times a little bit because the slow lurching zombies weren't necessarily scary anymore. They were more or less comical. Because you saw movies like Evil Dead where they were kind of campy and very funny, like the sludge zombie. He was just a zombie that came out of a thing of toxic sludge.
Oh yeah, like in Return of the Living Dead. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah, I
they
mean,
talked and stuff. Yeah, it was very campy. You know, it took the scariness away from it.
well, I mean, we talked about that before with like movies like Child's Play. It kind of take out the horror element and kind of added a little funny stuff to it just to some comic relief, which I mean is effective. It makes for a good movie. But if we're sticking to like the major horror scenes, I mean like Dawn of the Dead, excellent idea of evolving your zombies with the times and giving them more of a dangerous attribute.
Yeah, when you think about it, the slow moving zombies, you can just kind of like walk around them or whatever, or even it's they're. I mean, I guess how they're dangerous is when they like just get into these masses, and you just can't get away from them. You get surrounded
But
by
yeah,
'em.
the horde mentality. They get that horde mentality, and it's like you can't stop. I mean, for anybody who's played like the Left 4 Dead series, you'll know how it is. Like I mean, you get these zombies that are in the horde mentality. Those are fast as zombies, anyways. Those are what the evolved times. But imagine if the game was a little bit slower, kind of like what we're talking about, these slow, like the George Romero zombies. Put them into that kind of game. I mean, that's still terrifying in some aspects because I mean you can't avoid 30 undead bodies piling on top of you.
Yeah, but yeah, but I know what you mean about the zombies having to evolve because with the fast moving zombies, it really added a lot of tension to those movies. It just kind of ratcheted up it made it more scary because you just never because I guess there's more jump scares with them. They kind of like jump, they move quicker. There's more jump scares.
Well, it almost makes them seem smarter too.
Sure, yeah, because they're able to have more mobility, so they're definitely more of a threat. And so then the next type of monster that you have is vampires, and so with the vampires, you have the classic style of vampire with like Dracula, 1930s. Although that wasn't the first vampire movie technically, that was Nosferatu in the 20s. But in the 30s, you had Dracula, you had Bela Lugosi, and he just was this very gothic, regal kind of character. He could like mesmerize people, and he could also transform into like a bat and a wolf, and do things like that. And so, like with this type of vampire, you had the movies that represented this type of vampire was, like I said, Dracula from the 30s, and then even Bram Stoker's Dracula in the early 90s. And then also Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. That was those vampires kind of showed this classic style of vampire. And, within all the different types of vampire movies, they all pretty much get killed the same way, like a stake through the heart or sunlight, things like that. And so there's the second type of vampires, kind of like what I call the neo-vampire, or like the stylish vampire, where you have like vampires that are have heightened sex appeal. They, and these are kind of like featured in movies like The Lost Boys and Fright Night, and even Underworld to some extent. In these movies, the vampires can fly. They have superhuman strength, and they have like a human side where they look normal, and then they have like this beastly freak side where they transform whenever they're feeding or attacking. So those kind of movies seem to kind of come into their own in like the 80s and later on. And then the third type of vampire is like the feral vampires or the monstrous vampires. And some of the movies that you can find these in are like Blade 2 with these, I think they're called the Reavers, where like their mouth opens up and they've got these like, I don't know. It's kind of like, it's also kind of like in that new TV show called The Strain. Yeah.
That's an awesome vampire. Just saying. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they really pulled it off well.
Yeah, and so they're more like monsters. They don't. I mean, I guess in The Strain, some of them talk. I guess. I did read the books, but I have not seen the TV show yet. But I really like the books. So in other movies like this, you got 30 Days of Night and also Stakeland. Like I said, most of these vampires, they don't talk really. They just attack people. They're less human looking. They look more like monsters. They have claws and large teeth. Some of them don't wear clothing. Some do. So you have those different types of vampires. I've kind of named off some notable vampire movies. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of variation as far as like how they get killed. Like in the zombies, there's kind of different ways that, according to different types. But Dakota, what are some of your favorite vampire movies?
Well, I mean, you pretty much named off of every really very popular vampire movies, and I mean, I like almost every single type. Before we get like really too far into it, I'm going to say this: a lot of these like monster movies, they evolved over the years to change with the popularity of what kind of like vampire we like or what kind of monster we like, and that's how you're going to see that trend with us talking about like vampires and werewolves. But I really like the old vampires, the old mysterious types, the ones that are more like sophisticated, like the gentleman vampires.
Yeah, definitely like Bela Lugosi and
like Dracula.
Yeah.
I mean, what was Gary Oldman when he played Dracula? Very sophisticated, very, he had a very demanding presence and was in the room. You could feel he was there. So that's the kind of vampire I like. But then you get into like the underworld vampires. Those are more like, that's my thing. Like I like the action-y type vampires where the vampires play the good guy and the girls play the bad guy. That's not exactly horror. It's still like action movies kind of thing. But
yeah,
vampires have evolved. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And like as far as like the underworld movies, I don't know. Yeah, there's like, I guess they're mostly action, but you could kind of see some elements of horror movies because they do have monsters, in them.
I mean, with the evolution of vampires, we started out learning about vampires when we were young. I mean, learning about the creatures that come out at night, that transform from a bat into a man and back and forth. I mean, a lot of people don't know where vampires got their start. Vampires were creatures that sold their soul to the devil to gain eternal life. But in turn, the devil tricked them and said, well, to gain eternal life and eternal youth, you have to feed on the blood of the innocent. A good example of that is Count Dracula, or Vlad the Impaler. I mean, the story he was based off of, Vlad the Impaler, was an actual man. I think he was a Turk, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, he would impale his victims. That he would kill in war. They would take them and impale them while they were living. So he got this reputation, and then stories started to spread of how he used to drink their blood. And I think it was more or less a shock value to put fear into other people. So the story evolved into a vampire, and then we started to see more vampire stories and started getting into lore, like the ancient lore of how a vampire actually came to be. So I think like movies like that go into it, like we had from 2013 or 2014, it was Dracula Untold. Had some horror elements into it. It was still an action movie, but we start to see that with vampires. We want to see more of a backstory, and it's interesting how now we've gotten to like The Strain, where their mouths open up, they have this huge tongue. It's more of a virus vampire. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. You see some of the differences, like in the zombies. It's you have the classic undead vampire, you have the more virus type vampires, and there's stark differences between the two, as you know with appearance and just with it's mainly with appearance. And
but we kind of regressed too, because we have the Genoa vampires. They're very intelligent, but it's not a virus; it's a curse. And then we start to get towards like the underworld type vampires, where they're still sophisticated, they're still intelligent, but it's not a curse; it's more of a virus.
Okay.
And then we get to the 30 Days of Night vampires, where they're a virus, they're a killer, they just want to kill and kill and kill. So it's more of a digressing into a primal vampire, and we kind of see that with like the zombie movies too, like the undead zombies to the virus zombies. I mean, it's like an evolution. We evolve with the times. When we get to what people want, we want more popular stuff.
Yeah, I can definitely see the audience's influence on what our monsters look like now. You know how they change through time. It's interesting. You know, with like the vampires, like you said, it's kind of like a reverse evolution. They started off sophisticated, and now they're more like monsters.
Well, you remember the movie Daywalkers?
Yes, did that have Ethan Hawke in it?
Yeah, it was Ethan Hawke, and then what's his name from? What is his name? He played the Green Goblin in the in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, the movie was considered a box office flop, but it was a great movie just because it considered vampires a virus, but they were still sophisticated. So we saw that and figured out they could be cured. So but it's also a gore fest in my opinion. It's a very gory movie.
Yeah, it was an interesting. Interesting setting because it had this dystopian feel, like had this like futuristic, dysfunctional society where like the vampires had taken over, but they were like, feeding off of humans. You know, using humans as like feeding stock. But it was interesting. But then you also had like this situation where they started to devolve because of their, because they're running out of blood.
Yeah, and they were feeding on themselves, so it advanced that mutation.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting movie. It had an interesting story to it. Yeah, I did really like that one. So in Underworld we talked about like werewolves, so that kind of takes us to our next type of monster, which is the werewolf. And there's a couple of different types that I've noticed in different movies. Of course, with the Universal classic, The Wolfman, you've got, in movies like that, with American Werewolf in London and The Howling, these werewolves, they kind of change back and forth from man to a wolf man and back, and sometimes their identity is a mystery, and you can kill them with silver, things like that. I think it's silver is basically the main way you can kill them. And that's kind of the classic type of werewolf. But, some of them were just like a hairy, like in the Wolfman, it just kind of looked like a hairy man. But then like some of the later ones, like in the 80s, like American Werewolf in London, you actually had like, and then The Howling, you actually had like, they had, the werewolves had more of like a wolf head, but they still walked on two legs. And then the second type that you have are what I call like the slow turn werewolves, where, like in movies like Wolf with Jack Nicholson and also Ginger Snaps, it's where there's a progression over time. They don't necessarily transform. I mean, they do somewhat transform back and forth, but like they do develop wolf traits throughout the film, and then at the end they're like fully transformed into like this wolf type creature. So I kind of noticed those two distinctions. So I would say like for me like I really like The Howling, the first. I actually like the second Howling a lot, which people kind of hate that one, but and then of course I like American Werewolf in London. That's a pretty good one. Dakota, what are some of your favorite werewolf movies?
An American Werewolf in London. It's my top favorite werewolf movie just because of that transformation scene. The very first transformation scene you see, it's terrifying just because it's like it's a ooh, I don't know how to explain it. The cinematography, just the idea and the number of actual costumes they actually went through, the makeup progression they did for it was insane.
Oh yeah, the practical effects were amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that movie, I think it's underrated. It's completely underrated, and not a lot of people accept that it's one of the greatest werewolf movies of all times. I like the again the evolution, the progression of werewolves. We start off with these mindless creatures, and then we've gotten now to Twilight. I know it's a bad example, but where werewolves where they're fully in control of their transformations, and they can actually control it. I think it's more not of an evolution with time, but I think it's more of an evolution with an evolution in their creature.
Yeah, you do see that variation. You see where some of the werewolves can control the turning and some of them can't. Some of them it's more like a curse, and some it's more like hereditary where they're born with it and they fully accept it, and that's just part of who they are.
Let's go to like the horror comedy. What was it? Michael J. Fox. The wolf. What was it?
Teen Wolf.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like comedy horror. I know a lot of people think it's silly, but that right there is hereditary. It's passed down through generations. You mentioned the hereditary werewolves. They're werewolves that are magically transformed, and then there's a virus. Again, like with the vampires and the zombies, like we see a lot of elements being taken from other types of movies. I mean, werewolves and vampires were two of the oldest movie monsters. I mean, we're talking like 20s and 30s when they first came into prominence on the big screen.
I think the Wolfman came out in the 1941 or something like that.
Yeah, because there was a Dracula and Wolfman crossover, which featured I forgot who the guy who played Van Helsing in that, who played Abraham Van Helsing, because he wasn't a monster hunter, he was a scientist.
Yeah, I don't know. I need to go back and watch all those old black and white classics. I totally have kind of missed out on all those.
Well, in mentioning Van Helsing, if anybody has seen the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing movie with Kate Beckinsale, it's a great movie just because it kind of explains the backstory of these three creatures. You got Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman.
Oh, okay.
It kind of explains their backstory and why the Wolfman worked with Dracula, and kind of the feud between. We kind of seen the feud between werewolves and vampires. Kind of saying that the only thing that can kill Dracula is a werewolf. It's kind of far fetched, but it does a great example of showing how a werewolf can be mesmerized by Dracula too. How another monster can be mesmerized by a vampire.
It definitely seemed like in the movies where there's like various, when they have like all the different monsters in there, like Dracula or the vampire always takes the lead. It seems like.
Well, he's more of the commanding presence. I mean, vampire, like again, the classic vampire is the more sophisticated, the more in control, and then the Wolfman was out of control. He was just a monster that was trying to kill, maim, and eat.
So then, going into the next ones we go into are like your general creature features, which there's just kind of like various kinds of monsters, and a lot of these are kind of like the newer, like, I don't know, not newer monsters, but they're just like monsters that don't really, they're creatures that don't exist, that somebody just made up out of thin air. And you have, like I said, you have various kinds, but movies that feature these are like movies like Tremors, The Host, The Mist, The Descent, Jeepers Creepers, and so it's not really like, and so like in this category, I'm not really talking about any kind of alien creatures, but just kind of unknown creatures. And there's like different like sources like for these creatures. You have like the natural ones that these are like just unknown creatures that may have been around since prehistoric times, but they just show up as a result of human activity. Like they get woken up or dug up or something, or they in the cases of Jeepers Creepers, they periodically make appearances to feed. Like in those movies, it's like every 23 years it eats. And then you've got like the mutation type monsters that are a result of toxic waste or scientific experiments, like in The Fly. And then you have like kind of like it fits into the redneck or backwoods subgenre, but you have like inbreeding, can kind of create monsters. I'm trying to think of now what movie was like it. Well, I guess you have like Wrong Turn, those movies where those are kind of a blend of slasher and monster, because those the killers in like Wrong Turn were kind of monsters. They were inbred, but their look to them, was very monstrous. And then you have like demonic type creatures, like Pumpkinhead, that are kind of like summoned by like a witch or something like that. So you have like different ways that these monsters can kind of cross over into other subgenres as well. I think this is probably one of my favorite types of of creatures, is just like the fictitious creature. I really like Tremors, and The Fly is another one of my favorite movies. Dakota, which ones do you like in this subgenre?
I really like Tremors just because it was an interesting concept. I'm gonna go and throw this out there, like Splice, the Adrian Brody movie. It was it was a monster movie. It was also a sci-fi movie, but we get these like little bits of different genres thrown into it. But movies like I know it's gonna sound bad, but like the small, like I'm gonna go ahead and like kind of bring it in earlier, but like small creatures like Gremlins. That come from stories from like that aren't like old and ancient, but more like something that somebody just made up, or something that something that somebody can't explain. We talked about other creatures like that came out of like Indian mythology that could fit into that too, that just kind of come up out of nowhere, that are like disturbed spirits that take on an earthly form, and it's in the form of a monster. Trying to remember, there was a movie that came out a couple years ago like that. I don't even remember anymore. I don't know where I'm going with it, but
yeah, it's definitely like there's definitely like the mythological monsters that are like folklore based, or like the Leprechaun, or Troll Hunter, or even like dinosaurs, from history, that like Jurassic Park, and you have like Bigfoot movies, you have the Chupacabra. You got the Loch Ness Monster. It just goes like we talked about the Wendigo, and Mothman. So that's another. So that could definitely fit into like the fictitious creature, like the general creature, and it's not like the giant monsters, or because we'll get into that here next. And it's not really the small monsters, because we'll get into that too. But I guess they could all fit in. I guess maybe I'm splitting hairs, but.
Well, you'd have to kind of lump these all into one general topic. All these like mini tiny monsters that aren't like the mainstream kind of monsters we're used to. We're used to the mainstream giant monsters, the giant ant, Swamp Thing, Dracula, werewolf. But if you put in all these small creatures into the creature feature topic, and then break it down into these tiny little topics like the small creatures like Gremlins or Critters, stuff like that, it just kind of makes it to where it's not as broke down. It's more of a broad spectrum. We talk about how the different creatures come into being, instead of, I don't know where I'm going with this. Hopefully you can kind of catch on, but
yeah, just within the monster genre, there's a wide array of different types of monsters, and you don't, like, a monster's a monster, whether it be like big or small, or look like a person or not, so yeah, I guess they all do get kind of lumped together, and I don't know, I guess like I do like certain types of monsters better than others. Maybe that's kind of why I try to classify them a little bit more. But you mentioned the small creatures, and I think with that, you have like a lot of these small creature movies that came around, and I think a lot of them came around in the 80s, And I think they were a product of the success of Gremlins. I mean, Gremlins was a blockbuster success. So movie companies started making these other small creature movies like Ghoulies and even Critters. And then you also had other kind of lesser known ones like The Gate and Cat's Eye. But they're interesting because they could be like natural things or they could be like demonic. You know, it just depends. You know, there's kind of like that variation in there. But then, like, going from little monsters, you got big monsters too, and you have like some of the classic. So the giant monsters are definitely more in the classic realm with like King Kong and in the 30s, and in the 50s you had like the giant monsters like the giant bugs, the atomic age of monsters. You had them and the beasts from 20,000 Fathoms, and these giant monsters. They could be bugs or lizards or sea animals. And then you also have like in Japan you have like kaiju, which is like Godzilla, Mothra, Gamera. So you have those types of giant monsters. Then you have like as the evolution goes on, you have the more modern giant monsters like in Cloverfield, Pacific Rim. Eight-legged freaks, you have a ton of giant spider movies, and then there's that movie called Monsters, which had like the alien monsters in them, I think, which was kind of a different take on the monster movie. Dakota, you said you were kind of into the Godzilla movies as a kid. Do you still get into the giant monster movies?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely up to date right now with all the monster movies. Like I'm completely psyched for the new King Kong movie. Kong is like Kong Skull Island, and then that's actually going to be what leads into Godzilla versus King Kong, which were like our modern monster movies, which aren't technically horror movies, but they're very like they take from the old horror genre. We're talking about like the giant bugs. The giant ant from the 50s and 60s, like the atomic monsters. I mean, Godzilla was an atomic monster, but King Kong is a mystery. We don't know where King Kong came from. So I guess that's kind of where you get the horror aspect to it, like the fear of the unknown, I guess. But
yeah,
I do like the old, like the more I think it was like the 70s and 80s Godzilla movies where they're in color. Like Mothra, I like the Mothra and Godzilla movie. It was like Mothra versus Godzilla, and then there was the Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, which had Mothra and Godzilla teaming up against King Ghidorah, which I loved, which was awesome. It was just because there was a tag team throwdown.
Yeah. I mean, I love those as a kid. I loved seeing all the different types of monsters that they came up with. Especially in the old Godzilla movies from the 70s, and those are great. So you have like these fictional monsters, but then sometimes in movies you have just actual animals in nature, and animals in nature that kind of like attack people and kind of like nature kind of like strikes back kind of movies. And you have movies like Jaws and The Birds, and even stuff like Arachnophobia was like spiders, and you have like Dave the Animals and Frogs from the 70s. These monsters, these animals could be like, sharks, piranhas, insects, all different types of animals, and even like plants. There's even a couple, some movies like The Happening with Mark Wahlberg where you don't really see plants like getting like uproot and like chase people around, but they have a hand in like making people kill themselves. But you have movies like Day of the Triffids where it's actually plants walking around killing people, which I thought was, and it's kind of silly. Let's see, Dakota, do you have any of these nature gone amok movies that you particularly like?
Not really. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Jaws movies just because I found them a little bit slow.
Okay.
For the longest time, I just found them a little bit slow, and then The Birds, the classic. I mean, everybody who's a horror enthusiast has either seen The Birds or have like did a little research into it and just looked into it. But I'm not a big fan of the Nature Strikes Back movies because to me they're cheesy. They're cheesy and they get kind of old real quick.
Yeah, because it's just like normal animals, so it's kind of hard to believe that they. I guess you have to really suspend your disbelief, and because it's sometimes it's kind of hard to think the animal. Well, I mean, animals do attack people, I guess, in real life, but I guess it's kind of hard to make a horror movie around normal animals, because I feel like in horror a lot of times there has to be some aspect of like strangeness or unusualness, something that's just out of the ordinary. Which I guess the plant, the walking plant ones would fit more in that category, but those kind of get silly sometimes. So then, so we talked about animals on Earth attacking, but then you got creatures that are not from Earth. You have the extraterrestrial creatures, such as movies like Alien and The Thing, where you have creatures that are encountered either in space or on Earth as a result of a spaceship landing or crashing, or like a meteorite or something like that. Yeah, and I have to say, The Thing is one of my favorite monster movies. The effects are really good on that one. Alien's another great one. Those two are like right up there as far as like my Alien movies. Dakota, do you have any Alien movies that stand out for you?
Definitely The Thing. By far, it's one of the greatest uses of practical effects. The makeup work in it was perfect. It was kind of cheesy, especially like when they reached the hands down into the chest cavity and it bit their hand off. I mean, it was cheesy and weird, but I think it's actually I liked it because wasn't there like 2 versions of it, or 3 versions actually? Because I know there's an older version, then there's the Kurt Russell version, and then there was the one that came out in like 2005.
Yeah, there was a black and white version that it was called The Thing from Another World, and that one was the Thing just had a definite shape, and it was more of like a vegetable or something. It was kind of interesting. And then you got the one from the 80s with Kurt Russell, and then you got the one from, I want to say it's like 2011 with where it's kind of like a prequel to the Kurt Russell movie, and I actually like that one a lot too. It does have a lot of CGI, but they kind of mixed in the CGI and the practical effects, so it wasn't all CGI, but it was still and those movies kind of fit into like the body horror type of horror movies, which I really like too.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna go in and like lump Splice into it because it is Alien. It's not like fully natural science. I mean, I think a lot of it, because alien can mean anything. It doesn't mean like it has to be extraterrestrial, but it could mean like alien isn't like an alien type of science, like we're going outside of our realm of expertise. I was going to mention this earlier. We were talking about how like in sci-fi horror movies, how they create a monster. One line that a lot of people don't understand with these horror movies that gets thrown in there, and they don't get it till the very end, is some things men was not meant to tamper with.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of movies that have that example.
We talk, especially Prometheus. I'm gonna go out and live here and say it is definitely a prequel to Alien. Some things men was not meant to tamper with. We went to this planet and we screwed around and we kind of unleashed hell.
Yeah, and you have you see examples of that all over, like in the horror genre. You see like Frankenstein, the classic Frankenstein story, where Frankenstein is trying to bring somebody back from the dead, which is, he may have had noble intentions, but he did create a monster, with his experiments. So those are like kind of pretty much, those are all the subgenres I kind of created and wanted to talk about. And also, just for fun, I wanted to just briefly talk about some really like weird monsters that are just like silly monsters that I kind of ran across in my research. So there was a movie called Treevenge, and it featured killer Christmas trees, which I thought was kind of weird. And then you have a movie called Night of the Lepus from the 70s, which is like giant rabbits attacking people, which I don't know how anybody thought that would be scary. it's just kind of silly. And then you have a movie called Ginger Dead Man, which is a killer gingerbread man, who I think Gary Busey does the voice of it, which is just takes the silliness up a couple notches there. You have The Lift, which is a killer elevator. You have The Stuff, which is like killer stuff. It's like food. Killer food is like stuff that you eat. I'm not really sure what it actually was. This is this white stuff that people started eating, and it like started eating them from the inside out. And then you have a movie called Deathbed that has like a bed that kills people. I don't know. I guess it was like a haunted bed or something. I'm not sure. And then you have a movie called From Hell It Came, which was actually a killer tree stump, which is kind of silly. And then you have a movie called Rubber, which is a killer tire.
Oh my god, I've seen that.
Yeah, I think I actually sat through that one too, and I was like, what am I watching? I mean, don't get me wrong, I like B movies, I like silly stuff, but I think that one was like a little over the top for me even. And then there's like, last but not least, there's this one called Attack of the Killer Backpacks. And I kid you not, it's about backpacks that for some reason they come alive and they start attacking people. So it's
backpacks that kill people. Oh yeah. Boy.
I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, you just have like people come up with some of the silliest things to make into a monster. So anyway, so that's basically that's the monster subgenre in a nutshell. So like we said, you have various types of monsters, and you could if you just wanted to explore the monster subgenre on its own, you could spend years and years watching monster movies and have a lot of fun with it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of movies that fall into this category, but aren't necessarily just strictly monster movies. I mean, some of them will fit into paranormal movies, like the Hellraiser series. He's a creature, he's a demon creature, whatever you want to call him. But Pinhead is a very good example of that. The Mummy. We have more of those cheesy movies too. I mean, there's a lot of different examples that we really didn't say anything about. I mean, Anaconda or the Python movies or Sharknado. I mean, they're cheesy movies that nature gone awry. I mean, those. I was talking about how I don't like them, but I mean, there is one of those I will like, and that's Anaconda. The Anaconda series was great just because it was built like a slasher movie, in my opinion, just because this killer snake is on the prowl, and it's like I'm gonna eat all these people, and I don't care if anybody else gonna stop me or not.
Yeah. And from what I remember, they were played pretty straight. There was no humor in them at all.
Well, I mean, they tried to add some humor into it. I mean, was Ice Cube? He was in the first one, or was it?
I'm pretty sure it was Ice Cube in the first one. Yeah, that was the one with J-Lo in it.
Yeah, and then you have movies that came out like what was it? It was when they were on that world with the huge shark, and they were on like this oil rig. It was like a research facility. It was an oil rig turned into a research facility, and it had LL Cool J in it.
Oh wow, yeah. Oh yeah. Deep Blue Sea, right? I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, that was another one. Nature Gone Awry. That was a perfect example of horror movie. It was very good just because the acting was amazing. I can't say anything against the acting on it. Definitely.
Yeah, no, it was a good one. I like that one. It's been a long time since I've seen it though. Yeah, a lot of these movies I've seen, but I need to like rewatch them because it's been way too long since I've seen them, so I don't remember much of them. But yeah, these are definitely movies that I like to collect and seek out. So yeah, guys, I hope you found that informative and kind of a fun episode to talk about. And as always, we are on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @BlackCatPodcast. You can find us on Horror Amino. And if you would like to send us an email just to say hi or do a request or ask a question, you can get us on email at our address is blackcatpodcast@gmail.com. And if you would like to give us a review, if you listen to us on iTunes, you can always give us a review on there. That always helps us out. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher and iHeartRadio, and I think we're on Google Music too. So we're on lots of different places. But yeah, so I don't really have any plugs. Do you have anything you want to plug, Dakota?
Yeah, guys, just keep looking out for us. I am still writing my novel. I am actually very close to getting a rough draft up and ready. Be ready to hear some of that. Hopefully, after we do our Halloween episode, I'll read a little bit of it. It's not exactly horror, but it is a psychological thriller. It will make you think about yourself. Just a little excerpt that I am going to read. Again, sorry I haven't been very active. It's just my life has been kind of hectic right now, especially writing and working full time. It's very hard, but just keep a lookout. If you want to see some of my stuff on Horror Amino, it is Rainstorm 01. The Rain is spelled RAIYN. It's one word. Just keep a lookout, and hopefully we can accommodate some of you guys, because I know I've seen a few people post on my page. So
yeah, and you spoke about our Halloween episode. That reminds me. So for the month of October, we're actually going to be doing an episode a week. So we just released one last week. So this is going to be. So yeah, like I said, we're going to release an episode a week leading up to Halloween. So next episode is going to be where we talk about the paranormal or supernatural subgenre. And then on Halloween, we're going to talk about just the holiday of Halloween, kind of go back to our Mythos Macabre type of episode. And I think we're going to try to talk about a movie called Hellions. I can't remember, it's a fairly recent movie. We're going to talk about that and kind of break down the holiday of Halloween and some of the mythology behind that. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Hope your October's going good. Hope you're catching a lot of scary movies, and we will catch you next time. And remember to take a closer look at the world around you, and you might just find that it is stranger and more mysterious than you thought, especially in the Black Cat Shadow.